Thank you so much, Barbara. Uh, and thank you everyone for joining us online. I hope you're really as excited as I am to have our panel speak and share their insights. As Barbara mentioned, I look forward to your questions, which we will take during Q&A. Let me also introduce our panel very quickly. As everyone knows, executive transition is one of the most critical times and also is a critical function of the board. It can be driven by things like merger situations and separations, and the board may often or sometimes have to be very hands-on. And today we have with us this esteemed panel with a wide range of unique situations who they can speak into a little bit more further during our panel. And I'm happy to introduce first, I have Suzy Dyer, who is the Executive Director of the Parker Family Health Center and also a board member of the Greater Newark Conservancy. Welcome, Suzy.
Thank you.
And then I also have David Howson, who is the Senior Teaching Professor and Arthur Zankel Executive Director of Arts Administration at Skidmore College. He's the former board president of the Depot Theater and also the current trustee of the Hyde Collection.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Hsing.
And then we also have Margaret-Ann Cole, who's the CEO and founder of Margaret-Ann Cole Associates, who is also the board president of Rebuilding Together New York City. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I know we're here to talk about real experiences lived in these executive transitions. I'd love for you guys to share a little bit of the respective situations that you guys have experienced, and I understand they do span the gamut. So Suzy, if you don't mind going first and talking a little bit about the situations you've seen.
Certainly. Well, on the board at Greater Newark Conservancy, we had a long time executive director, more than 2 decades, decided it was time to move on to a new chapter in her life. And so she left the Conservancy, and we had the decision initially to make, do we look for a permanent director or do we look for an interim? And we decided to look for an interim, which gave us more opportunity to reflect and assess our needs. And then we conducted another search for a permanent director. And that was a really great decision in hindsight that we went through this longer process, because it gave us an opportunity. And I know that this is a huge undertaking, and I agree with you, Hsing, that it is the most important, one of the most important, if not the most important decision a board can make. But it really gave us an opportunity to reflect not only on what we wanted in the next executive director, but to reflect on the direction of the organization and what our needs were moving forward.
So it sounds like it was an opportunity as well as a transition.
Exactly.
Yeah. So David, if you don't mind sharing a little bit of some of the situations you've seen.
Sure. Thank you. David Howson. I am coming to you from Essex County, New York, a little town called Westport. I was the president of the board of the Depot Theater, which is the only professional theater in the Adirondacks in the North Country. The theater, when I was president in 2013, had undergone a financial, well, let's just say a financial crash, and it wasn't sure if the theater would keep its doors open. So the board, we had no staff, the staff was gone, we had no money, we had major deficits, and the board really had to make a decision whether to dissolve or move forward. And we made the decision to move forward. And of course, that opened up a whole nother host of questions, such as, well, if we move forward, what is that going to look like? It can't be what it was. So what will the new model look like? So I'm happy to say the theater had their 40th anniversary and they're going strong. And we can talk more about that as we go.
That's a major changes there. And Margaret-Ann, love to hear about some of the situations you've been through as well.
So when I first joined Rebuilding Together New York City, we had an executive director in place, and she was our first executive director because we were a relatively small organization that grew because of Hurricane Sandy, where we got a lot of funding. And at that point, we realized, we really had to make an effort to go from a very administrative board to a more strategic board. We weren't as prepared for our executive director to leave as I would have liked, and hopefully in the future we will have learned from that. We initially decided to give somebody internally the role until we could find somebody permanently. And unfortunately, that was too much for the individual because I think we overloaded her with her day job, as well as adding that to her plate. Also put a lot of pressure on the executive committee of the board. So then we decided to do an interim board executive director, who actually, that individual is actually on the phone today, Diana Breen. We were lucky to get her. And we also took the opportunity to begin to rethink, how we were structured and what we were focused on. And that gave us the opportunity to say, hey, there's lots of changes we can make. And so before we bring in somebody permanently, let's think about what we need to do in order to make the transition to the new person very smooth.
Wow. Although the situations were so different, I'm already hearing a couple of common things. Interim leaders and also executive search, maybe a little bit of succession planning there. If you guys don't mind, whoever wants to take the next one on talking about interim leaders. I think we had a question in chat about that as well. How did you guys handle it, and how long was the interim person in place?
Well, for the Greater Newark Conservancy, the person, I would say roughly about a year was in place. And that, how we handled it was we actually did an interim search as well. So it was 2 searches, and which sounds daunting, but it was wonderful because the interim executive director really came in and asked some very thought-provoking questions and saw things with a new pair of eyes that the board hadn't seen, and we were able to do a lot of housekeeping, which really helps when you bring on the new executive director, that they're not bogged down with doing that type of housekeeping.
I would say our situation was similar. We put the poor person into the interim role initially, thinking, wow, this individual has all the skills and could definitely do the job. But what we didn't really focus on, and in hindsight, we really should have, we didn't really think about, the impact on that individual and the amount of work that the individual had to do, and how difficult it was for her to be a peer and then all of a sudden to be, the boss. And then with the idea that she was going to be going back into the peer position when we made our decisions. So when we began to realize, hey, this is really not working for us, let's really look for an interim ED. And we were just fortuitous introduced to Diana because I don't believe that we did as much of the work that Suzy describes. We kind of fell into it and we were lucky. But we also took that opportunity because just as Suzy described, Diana came in and she just asked a lot of questions. And she, pointed out where she thought we could make changes, et cetera. And it really did create a better environment for the new ED to walk into, so that because we were at a pivot point, right? We were in this process of going from a very small organization into making the next leap into a bigger organization. And we weren't designed to do that, and Diana helped us get there.
David, similar thoughts?
Yes, similar but different. We were in a position where we didn't have any money, like zero money, and we could not bring in an interim, nor would we actually want to do an interim search when we have, a mess to clean up. So the board really pivoted from, oversight into operations, and we had some trustees that was not for them and that was okay, and they hit the road. And we had others that really jumped in and helped to pull the organization together. Number one, of course, fundraising. Number two, of course, get the season up for the next summer. And once we pulled off that, which we were able to right the ship, then we were able to hire, not an interim, we just got a new business manager and a new artistic director, but a different model. So those were part-time models, but we can talk more about that later. But it was we took basically a year to right the ship and sort of figure out, with the help of Nikon, what we wanted to be when we got through this, assuming we would get through it, and we did. But it was very reflective. So I think that was a good decision for us at that point.
Well, so it seems like everyone went through a executive search process either early on or as things evolved to really flesh out the job description and what you guys were looking for. Can you guys talk a little bit about that process as well? Whoever
I
wants
can
to jump
start.
in.
I can start.
Sure.
So when we began to use an executive search firm initially, even though we had somebody interim in place, and it took us about 9 months to really find the right person. Surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, we actually got introduced to our current executive director through our interim executive director, and that was very worthwhile, because looking at it through her eyes, we could really see what were the skill sets that we needed, and she really helped us identify somebody who could come in and play that role, definitely to the point where we've been flourishing. And also with such a difficult time during the pandemic, it was very challenging. So, and the new ED had come in, and literally 8 months later, we went into a pandemic situation that when you're trying to rebuild and make homes healthy and safe, you're in people's homes. So we couldn't do that. So we really had to rethink, how we went about our business and come up with virtual options for our training programs, et cetera. So it was a very challenging time, but I do think it was really worthwhile to involve the interim ED in the search process for the permanent position.
In terms of the job description for the ED, our interim executive director did something that was really vital to helping us come up with the job description for the ED. He really went through everybody's job descriptions of the staff who was already there, and made sure that those agreed with what they were presently doing. Not surprisingly, it wasn't reflective of what people were presently doing. And so those job descriptions really needed to be updated, and some of them completely reworked. And so that helped us come up then with the job description for the ED. And also, I think all three of us are saying something similar about having a moment to reflect, and taking that moment to reflect and see what we wanted to be when we grew up in our next chapter. That also helped us come up with the job description for the executive director. And we did work with our outside executive search firm to help us with that.
Yeah, I'll just agree. It was a great moment of reflection. We took a year to come up with the two job descriptions, one for the business manager and one for the producing director, which is of course more on the artistic side of the house. But we did the search ourselves. We did a national search, but we were in a year after the crash, we were in a much better place, and I think a much more attractive organization for someone to come into. Plus, they knew that this board was super committed because we'd just gotten ourselves out of a very deep hole. So that was a great strength that we had, probably the greatest strength in the job description for anybody. So we had a lot of applicants.
So if I could, I'm going to add one thing. I think when we went into the search, we had one idea in mind of who would be the right ED. I think having the interim ED helped us reshape that. So I would say that what we thought we wanted and what we really wanted weren't the same. So that's why having the interim ED helped us solidify that. And I think that really helped us to get a wonderful ED who's in place now.
I totally agree. We had a similar experience.
Um,
I'll just say yes, we had the same experience.
I think, but looking at this, it also seems like you guys took a step back to look at more broadly the vision of the organization, the whole program itself. Can you guys talk a little bit about, you know, some of the reflection there and some of the learnings?
Can start. Our organization had its hands in many different pots and was trying to do many things. And I think the board really took a hard look, and we did a lot of stakeholder surveys, and we really refocused our mission on what people knew about our organization was that we performed professional theater in a train station that was built in 1876 and is still a train station today. The train still comes there twice a day from New York City. That's crazy, but it's a lot of fun, and that's what people knew us for. So we really dove into those productions and sort of jettisoned some other things that we weren't doing all that well, and they weren't our strengths. So we really focused on our strengths, and I think that was a super reflective exercise for the board to do.
We had a very similar experience at Greater Newark Conservancy, and it was a time for us to really come together as a board and also with staff leadership. What were we doing well? And even though we had done some things in the past, well, we weren't doing those, or the demands had changed. People's focus had changed. And I think also going through COVID and going through this process, COVID has led a lot of nonprofits and for-profits to reflect and change the way that we operate. And I think that also was a silver lining in this moment. It allowed us to really see and assess what were we doing well and what did the community need. And how are we meeting those needs? So it gave us, and I do want to add that we did have community members as part of our search process. It wasn't just board members. So because we wanted to make sure that we were hearing what the community was thinking.
I would say that with Rebuilding Together New York City, we really had a board that was very hands-on. I mean, at one point, you know, our financial advisor who was on the board was actually doing the payroll. And so that, you know, that was something that really needed to change. And we were in the process of doing that. We also took some time to do a strategic plan to think about how we would grow, et cetera. And it was a little bit of a gut punch to lose our ED in that period of time. However, I think that we were all talking about this whole transition. It was also very, the timing couldn't have been better for us to do that reflection, because we actually switched out a lot of board members. We have a much more diverse board than we did prior. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we were able to get the organization in a stable place that allowed us to begin to concentrate on the board membership in addition to the work and the mission, et cetera, because we were all about the mission and we were all about making sure that we were interacting with the communities, and we weren't really taking care of ourselves as an organization. And that whole process allowed us to do it.
I can just jump in. I think that's a super great point that Margaret-Ann made, and that we did something very similar. And yeah, just echo everything you said.
That's really wonderful. I think my experience with BoardStrong is similar as well. That we also went through, you know, some executive transitions, mergers. I think I've been around for, is it 2 or 3 mergers? And we also had several, you know, executive transitions and other things going on. So that's really great insight, everyone. I don't know if you guys also had the opportunity to leverage committees during this process for search, right? Some of the transition things. Maybe also in terms of how you might have gotten community members involved. There's a question about that from the chat.
So we definitely leveraged committees and created some new committees. So we had a transition committee before we hired our interim director, and that was really important because that allowed us to go through, and it was basically the biggest to-do list ever as a committee, and we would meet very regularly. It was almost on a weekly basis in the height of this, and it allowed us to go through our policies, our bylaws, again, housekeeping, and also a job description and the creation of a job description for the interim. So that was very helpful. And then out of that transition committee came the search committee, which was a smaller subcommittee of the transition committee. And the search committee was responsible or charged with the permanent executive director search. So we definitely, and on the transition committee and on the search committee, we had outside folks, non-board members, as part of those committees. And if they couldn't make the commitment to join one of those committees, we actually worked with a consultant who helped us reach out to committee members to basically hear what the community was thinking about the Greater Newark Conservancy and what the outside community members thought we should be doing.
Yeah, I can just say that we had just gone through the revising our bylaws for the New York Nonprofit Revitalization Act. So we had just restructured our committees right before this crash happened. So it really was a chance for our committee structure to, be activated. And they ran with it and they really jumped in. We had moved from a sort of passive committees to very active committees. I think that was super important. We engaged community members in our searches. We engaged community members in all the work we were doing, just trying to stay alive. We were very honest with them about our financial picture and very straightforward. And I think our community appreciated that. And I would do that again.
I don't think we've used committees to the best of our ability. We've always had an executive committee, and the executive committee has been very active. Have a finance committee, which is very important, right, to manage. And then we also have a development committee. So we have a group of folks, and many of these are from outside the organization to help us with our funding events, et cetera, because that's our life's blood and it's so important. I think that we overly rely on the executive committee. So anybody who becomes a executive committee member, you're stepping up to do quite a bit. And then we did put in place a associate board, which was very helpful because those were individuals then that we could have them work with us on the different areas that we wanted to focus on. I will say, I don't believe that from the community standpoint that I don't think the community had any idea that we were going through, this transition. From their perspective, it was business as usual. We would, work with the homeowners. We would work with the individuals in our workforce training program. For them, the individuals, our program director, our workforce training director, they dealt with them, directly. So from that standpoint, they didn't feel like there was any break in the service that they were getting. I will say that we're moving toward involving the community more so, right? So the whole idea of making sure that our board is more diverse. If we're helping communities and we don't look like the community that we're helping, I think that does erode some of our credibility. We recently had somebody from one of the unions join our committee, which was kind of interesting because if you think about it, We also have a lot of folks from construction companies on our board, and now we have somebody from a union, and there is a lot of friendly tension, right, between those two factions. And I think we shied away from, putting our toe in the union pool. And then with our new ED, we said, you know what, we're just going to go for it and see, let's mix it up a little and hope that perhaps that tension will actually create a better organization.
I guess another related question would be whether you guys had the opportunity to leverage these learnings, looking back at the strategy and also working with interim leaders, taking all of this into effect in onboarding the new executive, right? And how to support them as they come on board. Any thoughts?
Well, having the interim executive director with the onboarding was crucial, right? Making sure that we had an agreement on how long the transition period would be, the areas that we were going to cover. We were very specific about the entire onboarding process. I'm a big believer in the first 90 days and all of the things that you could do to impact any organization. So I really felt that we had a very good transition period, and our executive director was really getting into the swing of things. And then, as I said, the pandemic hit and all bets were off. Our focus had to be completely different, right? To make sure that we could keep our employees and we could keep the organization afloat and do what we could during a period of time when there wasn't a lot of interaction with homeowners like we normally would have.
I would say that I would agree with everything you just said, that the interim really helps with that process because, again, I come back to the housekeeping. Things have been cleaned up and put into place. So it really helps to have, it really helped us with any form of onboarding because things have been cleaned up.
Yeah, that's how we were as well. And we had, our board was very operational for the first sort of, we call the recovery year, which in a way was super great for the transition because the board knew what it was like to run a professional theater company because they had to do it. And so every question that our potential candidates would ask, we could answer truthfully and be very aware and honestly. And it was like a whole nother world. It was, we weren't at the 30,000 foot level, we were at the ground level. And for a board that wasn't used to that, it was very eye-opening for them. So it was a very healthy thing for us to do and added benefits to the search.
And during this period, I think, David, to your point of the board being very operational and then lifting the gaze up to be more strategic. And then also with the changing management, were there board changes, right? I think maybe there were some couple of examples that came up already, but with diversity and other things. The board changes that come about, and how did you guys manage it? And I think we also had an earlier conversation that it's natural for this to happen for organizations and to help us support the organization going forward.
Well, to David's point, our board too was very operational during this, at the beginning of this transition. And in fact, our treasurer was preparing the financials. And so which shouldn't be happening. And with the interim, the board started to grow into more of a board governance strategic thinking board rather than being in the weeds, the operational weeds. And that was wonderful because then we could really focus on our executive search and what our needs, what the global, more global needs were for the organization. And also people did decide that it was time to move on from the board, and we brought new people in, and that's a natural cycle for a nonprofit. So that I look at that also, and I think the Conservancy looked at it as an opportunity.
So we have had a lot of change on our board. I mean, it's also a similar story where we were going from a very administrative board where we were, hands-on doing the work, to a much more strategic board where we were really looking to people to help us fundraise so that we would have unencumbered funds. Also, too, I think when you're thinking about the work that when somebody's so close to the mission and it means so much to them and they're a board member, they can burn out. So I think it is natural for a period of time for board members to be on a board for a period of time and then decide that they want to step away. It doesn't mean that they couldn't come back at a future time, but I think sometimes having some fresh eyes really helps. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what we wanted our board composition to be. Like, what kind of expertise did we want to bring on board? So we really looked for somebody who was, a lot of folks in the construction industry, because that's the work that we do. But we also were looking for somebody who had financial acumen to help support, all of our, the audit and all of the things that the financial committee needs to do. We're in the process now of looking for somebody with social media and communications experience. Because we've spent money in the past on an outside organization to do that, but not necessarily is that the best usage of our hard-won dollars. So having somebody who could guide us and put us in the right direction from a strategic perspective is really important. So for us, I think it's just natural that we will constantly evolve our board, because we will have different needs based on the market, the economy, the customers, the consumers of our services that we have. So that will constantly change. Also, too, we started out as helping homeowners who couldn't afford to make their homes healthy and safe. And then we branched out into a workforce training program where we would take people from those same communities and put them through a program where we would make them construction job ready, so that they could make a living wage and be in the communities and bolster those communities that we were trying to serve. So as we began to go into that direction as well, having people from different areas to support both of those strategic pursuits was really important.
I think one of the first things I did as board president, which I accepted that role coming out of, or when we knew things were in dire straits, is I told the board, we have to be prepared for the board to change. And I think that's okay. And that means some people are going to leave, some people are going to come on, and those that stay are really going to want to help the organization succeed. We jumped into the weeds and really did everything from fundraising to operations. We were 100% volunteer. This was not the model that we wanted, but it's something we had to do to get us out of what the situation we were in. But the community also saw us working super hard, and that energy just spread like wildfire. So now the board has had to step back from being operational, yet another transition, right? Because sometimes being operational is fun, right? You get to see the inner workings of everything. But now today's board, 9 years later, that board is very different than the board that was involved in the transition out of that crash. So I think, boards have life cycles, and you have to be prepared to let those happen as they come. They come in waves, they're unexpected. But when a board member leaves, it's not always a bad thing. It could be an opportunity for change. Yeah, that's something I've had to get used to as well as a board chair and board president in other organizations. But it's a natural evolution, and you just have to be prepared for it to happen.
And I guess we've been getting a number of questions coming in, and maybe since they are relatively related, David, there's one that came in about being more operational and also getting board members to do the work and maybe encouraging that. Did you find board members leave
Sure.
because of some of that, or yeah, if you can comment.
I can answer that one, and that's a great
Yeah.
question. So thank you for submitting that on the chat. We did not do active board recruitment during this time where we had to hunker down and get in the weeds. We didn't think it was a great time to bring on new board members. You know, new board members you have to manage too, and you have to onboard them, and you have to, you know, orient them, and it wasn't a time. Plus, we didn't even know if we're going to be around in a year, so it wasn't, you know, we had nothing really to offer any new board members. Now, once we got up and settled and things were looking good, then we really did an inventory of our board. We figured out where the board wanted to go. So I hope this helps answer your question. Yeah, for the person in the chat.
Please let us know, send us another chat if you have a follow-up. I think maybe since we are getting some very hefty questions, maybe we should address them. There were a couple where people on the line are interested in understanding more about involving the community and the different ways of doing that. I think I've heard involving the community through board recruitment, involving the community through you know, the search committee, and then also I think Suzy, you gave an example of leveraging consultants. So maybe if you guys could share other ways that you've leveraged communities and getting their buy-in.
Just because I'm fresh on this, we, you know, in the performing arts, every dollar spent at an organization, an arts organization, returns $5 to $7 in the community. So our community came after us. They were very much open to what can we do to help the theater, right? Because the restaurant next door needs the theater, and the hotel down the street needs the theater, and everybody in town needs the theater to be open and running because it helps them. So one of the first calls I got as board president was from this wonderful couple that owns a large business in town. And they said, come have lunch. And we talked, and they said, you know, what's the plan? I said, well, here's the plan right now. It's subject to change. And, you know, they got out their checkbook and wrote a check and said, let this help you get started. And I could then leverage that community, you know, buy-in with another community member and so forth. So we were very fortunate that we had the community come after us and just open arms, you know, what can we do to save this organization? So that was pretty rewarding for us.
We reached out to community members and also neighbors and schools and also political leaders just to tell them what was going on, because it's better to get ahead of it and frame the issue and let people know what's going on. And we did the same thing, and I saw this in the chat. How do we notify donors? There was a question about donors. I think it's really important when you're going through this type of transition, and our board felt it was really important to be ahead of the story, and that you frame the story. And so we actually we made a list of our largest supporters and also a list of our community leaders, and we reached out to them and told them what was happening and that we would keep them apprised of it. And lo and behold, some of them were on our search committee and on our transition committee, which to David's point, that was really rewarding because they wanted to get involved and they previously hadn't been involved to that degree. So I think being proactive about it and not waiting for people to call you is very, very important.
You know, Suzy and David, those are really, you know, salient points. It's interesting. I don't think we did as much of that as the two of you described. So we were in the happy position of we had a development director in place, we had a program director in place, we had a workforce training director in place. So from our community perspective, there was no break in their interaction. So, but in hindsight, and with hearing what you're saying, really doing more to have introduced our new ED would probably have been a good thing for us to have done. I think that, you know, the individual who's in the role now is so personable and so well connected with the, you know, the funding sources that we have, and has a reputation in her own right, that we didn't really have to do a lot for her to be established. And once again, you know, we were lucky that we were able to find such a dynamic individual.
And speaking of which, you know, looking back, what might have been things you would have done potentially differently, lessons learned in this executive transition process?
So I have something somewhat controversial, and I think it would be hard for people to do, but I think it would be ideal, and it shouldn't just happen with nonprofits. It should happen with every organization. When there is an individual in such a high profile role, and that individual is unhappy for some reason, it would be so much better for the individual, as well as the board, as well as the organization, if that individual would come forward and say, you know, I'm just not feeling the love for whatever reason. And there might be something that we could do to change it. There might not be something that we could do, but we would be supportive, because it's as much about the personal well-being of an individual as it is their work environment. And I just really encourage folks to have those courageous, difficult conversations, to talk about whether somebody's uncomfortable or thinking that they really want a different opportunity, because that would have helped us to plan better, and would also have helped us with our succession planning better.
I'll just go right off succession planning. We did not have a succession plan in place, and we should have had one. And the time to build a succession plan is when everything's going great, right? And you don't think you're going to need one. That's the exact time to have one, and we didn't. And so we were caught off guard. But we also had a board that was very trusting and didn't really think they needed one at the time. So lesson learned, you always need a succession plan, no matter how well things are going or appear to be going.
I totally agree with David, because we didn't have one either. And after having an executive director for so long, I mean, decades, that would have really helped. And to think about it when things are going really well, it's not stressful. When you're, you know, building the plane as you're flying it, it's stressful.
I saw that somebody asked about why the having somebody play the interim role from within the organization wasn't ideal. And it wasn't ideal for a number of reasons. It wasn't ideal because the individual who was quite capable of being an ED had purposely chosen not to be the ED. And so we forced her into a position because we knew she had the skill set. I think that was selfish on our part, and it wasn't in her personal best interest. And I think that's part of it. But I've also seen with other organizations, when you put somebody into an interim role where they're going to go back into a role that they had before, you have to be very clear about what their expectations are, also how you're going to compensate them, as well as what it's going to look like to transition them back into the role that they had before. Because sometimes when you have, you know, complete control over an entire entity, and then you go back to just having control over one piece, you have to be really cognizant of what that's going to mean for you, and what's that going to mean for the new ED stepping in the role.
So maybe David and Suzy, do you guys have succession plans or plans to create one?
I'm no longer on the Depot Theater board, so I hope they have a succession plan in place. I'm with another organization that the board is talking about it and is doing one. So, you know, whether you have one, an actual like plan written down, or you're thinking about it, you just have to have that. You have to have those in the works, at least in the back of your mind, because you never know when there's going to be change. And especially right now, there's change happening every day.
So as chair of the governance committee, that is definitely on the to-do list. And we have been talking about it a lot.
It's a little difficult though, right? I mean, so with a bigger organization, there are individuals that you could groom, right? Who you could help with coaching, et cetera, to step into a role. With smaller organizations, there's not that wide of a pool for you to choose from. And so I think it does create another level of challenge. But I agree that, and I will say we are woefully behind on having a succession plan. And I know better than anybody that hope is not a strategy, but I'm just doing everything I can and hoping that our current ED, stays with us for decades, like your prior ED, Suzy, just because she's making such an impact on the community and the organization.
Right. I think with the time left, we can also respond to the questions that have shown up in Q&A. There's a question about formal search committees and experience using search firms. You guys did leverage an external search firm, I believe, in most of the cases. Suzy?
We used an outside search firm, and what was wonderful about that experience is that it keeps you on task. They are asking the right questions, and you have to provide the information. So it really helped to keep us on schedule and on task throughout the entire process. So and I have to tell you, that was an issue that came up. You know, do we want to spend the money, which is limited, on an outside firm? But I think that the board would now say, after a lot of discussion about it, that that was a really good decision. And we were also fortunate in that funders also helped us and got involved, and we're pleased that we were using an outside firm. So, and they came forward, and we didn't even have to ask for help with that. They just said this is a good decision and helped us underwrite it. So we're thankful for that.
Yeah, we actually, this may or may not be the best approach, but in each situation, I think we start with trying to do a search on our own because of the issue with it's expensive to hire someone from outside. However, all the points that Suzy makes are really critical. They keep you on task. They help you identify what you need, even when you think that's not what you need. And a good executive search consultant will push you and say, you know what, you're really not thinking out of the box, or you're thinking too narrowly. The one thing I do strongly recommend is that you find an executive search organization that's really well connected, because it is all about who they can connect to and how they can bring the right individuals for you to speak with. Otherwise, you're not going to get the breadth of the type of candidates that you want to really think about and look at.
We have some other related questions about using succession plans in this process. So I think how broad have succession plans that you guys may have used or aspire to been? Where do you start? What are some first steps that you would recommend our audience take?
We have on another organization I'm involved with now, we have a succession plan for board officers, which I did not have on the Depot Theater board, and that's really great. And let's see. Yeah, so board officers. So that's something that I was not used to and that a former chair put in place. But I think that's really good to have that knowledge on the board of who's on deck and who's in the pipeline. And otherwise it's very easy to get stagnated.
I think the first step with the succession plan, internally, is you have to do a really comprehensive talent assessment. And that, it's got to be objective and it's got to be 360. It's got to be from the board perspective. It's got to be from the consumer of your service perspective. It has to be from, the individuals who are working with the leaders in your organization. So that you can look at the talent assessment and compare that to what are the specifications for the role that you would be looking to have a succession plan for. I think that it's also worthwhile when you're talking about like the board succession that David did, the more that you can have relationships, because I don't necessarily think most organizations can just pick somebody from within and put them into the role. So the more you can have relationships with external folks, either through committees or through an associate board, et cetera, so that you could tap somebody with the resources and the capability that you're looking for. I think that would be critical.
I think session planning could go in lots of directions, and maybe this is a future panel, Barbara. And I see you're here to remind us of the time. So
exactly.
Thank you, everyone, for your great insights. Maybe to wrap things up, thank you, everyone who's been on the line and submitting your questions. I think we all have similar concerns as board members, and it's really great to see that we can learn from each other. Maybe if the panelists would mind one final short, succinct thought of advice for the participants here.
I would say look at this as an opportunity and don't be afraid. Use it as an opportunity.
I like the don't be afraid. Go in a different direction, because this is the time for you to try something different, where maybe before you kind of wanted to, but were afraid to.
I would just close with, focus on today and tomorrow. Do not focus on yesterday. Just look ahead.
Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Hsing, thank you. Margaret-Ann, Suzy, David, great thoughts, great participation. We really appreciate it. For everybody on the line, our next panel discussion is May 19th, and we will have 2 pairs of CEO with their chairs and talking about building that relationship. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and please visit our website and check out some of our resources.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, everybody.